Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be diving back into the world of what is in effect Golden Age superheroes that fell into the public domain and were repurposed for a new comic book with Project Superpowers #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. Before we get started today, I would like to point out that if I sound a little bit different today, that's because I'm feeling a bit under the weather and am dealing with some pretty terrible allergy symptoms at the moment. So I do apologize if my voice sounds a little weird or you hear me clear my throat throughout the video. First published in January of 2008, I think. There's not a point within the pages of this book where there's an actual date on when this was first published, and from what I could find online, it's apparently 2008, but I can't find any real confirmation on that specifically. I don't know. Dynamite, for whatever reason, didn't feel the need to put the publication date on the inside of the cover. But on the front cover, we see a fantastic illustration by Alex Ross. He very rarely disappoints, of the characters of Green Llama, the Black Terror, and also the Dynamic Family, that of course being Dynamic Man, Dynamic Woman, and Dynamic Boy. Now, the Dynamic Family, you might be thinking to yourself, I don't recall seeing them in issue number 0, and they were kind of there in the background, but were never formally addressed throughout most of that story. Also, if you haven't watched my video on issue number 0 of Project Superpowers, you really need to watch that before you get into this one, because it is a very linear story in terms of progressing through one continuous narrative. And if you're not starting at the beginning, you get real lost real fast. Plot, covers, and art direction by Alex Ross. Plot and script by Jim Kruger. Interior art by Carlos Paul. Lettering by Simone Boland. Colors by Deborah Carita, I think is how you say that. Alternate incentive covers by Michael Turner with Peter Steigerwald. Special thanks to TJ Ross. We can see that there were, in fact, 4 separate covers for this book. There's the 2 main covers, and then there's the negative variants of those covers. I have only the cover that you saw at the beginning of this video. I managed to pick up like the first several issues of this series in a collection really only like a year ago. So if I were able to find any of these covers, I'd have to really go looking for them. And I have no idea how much they go for nowadays, but I don't think they'd be super cheap, but maybe not super expensive either. I'll always keep an eye out for them. On the first page, we see the Dynamic Man standing in what appears to be somewhat of a penthouse type of suite in a building with the Dynamic Woman as they look down upon the city of New York. And the Dynamic Man states that, he created all of this. He is the one responsible for all of the life that takes place in the city, the way they live, the way they conduct themselves every single day, communicate across distances, the way they experience music and entertainment, and the reasons that they have fears and go to war with each other. And the Dynamic Woman asks him, what do you see when you look down upon them? And Dynamic Man says, that's simple. I see that it is good. As we see him walk away, and the room is filled with what looks to be like different pieces of art or perhaps ancient relics. We are then teleported to the mountains of Tibet, where we once again join up with Bruce Carter, aka the Fightin' Yank, as he embarks on his quest to locate the Green Llama. However, he is not alone, as he is being tailed by both his ancestor spirit and the American spirit, still draped in the flag from his home. Carter continues to think to himself of how he believes that this may have been an ill-fated idea and that he may not survive the quest to find the Green Llama, as we see him collapse in the snow during the middle of the storm. His ancestor spirit believes that he is on the verge of death and basically calls out the American spirit, stating, you're killing him. Why are you doing this? And blaming the American spirit for the predicament that Bruce is in right now. However, the American spirit retorts that it is Bruce Carter's quest that he embarked on by the behest of the ancestor spirit of his, that sent him down this path in the first place, and that if his ancestor spirit had just, not meddled with his life and the world of the living, that none of them would be here now as we see Bruce Carter regain consciousness. The ancestor spirit of Carter then states to the American spirit that he's going to kill him, which is kind of funny because he's doesn't have any kind of a corporeal form. But the American spirit then says that he probably shouldn't be judging Bruce Carter's ancestor so harshly, as because his ancestor is dead, he can no longer grow and is locked in the mindset of his time, and that he is, in fact, just a product from which the age he came from. And so it's weird. Like, it's almost as if, once you die, whatever amount of growth you had throughout your life is the total amount of growth you could ever have. And in a spirit form, you're locked in that, according to the lore of this comic book. And then the American spirit states that he actually pities Bruce Carter's ancestor. And then Carter realizes that he's found what he was looking for as he steps into what appears to be a crack in the side of the mountain and pulls down his hood. As Bruce emerges through the other side of the cave, he is greeted by a beautiful, glistening city that appears to exist within a somewhat tropical environment. It's never stated that this is the city of Shangri-La, but it seems like that's what they're implying, given that this is a, beautiful hidden city in the mountains of Tibet. But once again, never specifically stated in this issue. Carter is then caught off guard when a man he recognizes by the name of Sarong, I believe is how you say it, approaches him and welcomes him to the city, and then says, why don't you come with me? Carter is surprised, one, that the man doesn't recognize him, though given the massive amount of aging he's done since the last time the two of these men met, it seems reasonable that he wouldn't recognize Carter. But he's also surprised that the man seems to know that he's there to see the Lama, but he states that everyone who comes there is on a journey to see His Holiness. As they make their way through the city, they enter the home of the Lama and go into his library, where we see him sitting on a large chair. There's a lot of foliage growing throughout the library. We then see that Carter shouts out the Lama's real name, Jet, and says, "It's me, Bruce." The Lama then states, no one's called me that in quite some time, as Bruce says, "Well, I remember that you hated being called Jethro." And as he removes his hood, we see that the Lama does not appear to have aged much at all since the last time these two men saw each other at the funeral of the Flame. We then see that the Lama is very excited to see his old friend and embraces him and brings him into his home, stating that they need to catch up, and asks if he needs anything to eat or drink. However, Carter is rather worried about the conversation that they're about to have, because this is where Carter's going to tell the Lama the story of what he did with the urn in capturing all of the other heroes inside of it as a means to try and capture all the evil in the world. Again, that whole story point is explained in issue number 0. If you want to know exactly how that all worked out, go back and watch my video on issue number 0. And as Carter continues to talk, he starts to ramble a little bit and, repeat himself, as he's very worried about whether or not the Lama will in fact just kill him for his crimes. And as he finishes his story, he looks at his old friend, who looks back at him and just says, "Hey, you want some tea?" The two men then go for a stroll out in the fields and continue their conversation, as the Lama tells Carter that despite his appearance, he does in fact age, and that it's summer now, but he has faced many winters, and it's quite invigorating. At this point, the American spirit talks to Bruce Carter, stating that, he didn't expect that Carter would have started to lose his mind, as he believes that the Lama is perhaps dealing with some sort of dementia. Carter then scolds the spirit and tells him, "Why don't you just come out so he can see you?" Then the Lama asks if Carter is talking to his ancestor spirit. Carter corrects him and says, "No, this is a different spirit. This is the American spirit, who is the one that put me on this journey to come find you in the first place." And then we find out that the llama, despite being very skeptical of the conversations and guidance that Carter was getting back during World War II from his ancestor spirit, has now come to accept that these spirits are in fact real and that these ghosts do exist. And he's only come to this realization within the past few years. So Carter decides to open up his bag and take the flag out that the American spirit shrouds itself in and put it on the ground so that the spirit can use it to manifest its, shape so that the llama can see it. The llama, however, finds this somewhat amusing, stating, "Wow, you're carrying a flag with you. How fitting." We then see an advertisement for the Zorro comic that was produced by Dynamite. I don't know if it still is being produced by Dynamite. Maybe, maybe not. I haven't paid much attention to what Dynamite's been putting out recently. I never read any issues of this. I'm sure it was fine if you enjoy Zorro and Zorro stories, but it wasn't something that really piqued my interest all that much. If I ever come across a big collection of it for a good deal, I might grab it just to see what it was about. We then get an advertisement for the Brothers in Arms comic that is based off of the Ubisoft video game. I never played this video game. I never read this comic. In fact, until going through this issue here, I didn't even know there was a companion comic for the Brothers in Arms video game. If you read it and wanted to talk about it at all, feel free to leave any comments about it in the comment section below. If you played the game and thought it was good or bad, let me know in the comments below, because I really don't know anything about it. We then see the American spirit spring to life draped in the American flag and instantly start scolding the llama, stating that he needs to stop speaking in mysterious metaphors and tell Carter what he's become. However, we see that the llama remains jovial and actually puts his hand on the shoulder of the American spirit, saying, "Wow, an actual ghost. I can't believe it. I'm seeing a real live ghost." Well, not alive, but you get what I'm saying. And then Carter questions the llama as to what the spirit was speaking about. It's at this point that the llama explains to Carter that he has been on a very long and very deep spiritual journey that has given him a connection to all life force on the planet Earth, as we see him growing vines up around his feet, and that he now can, do all sorts of things and has all sorts of abilities that he never had before and that Carter has never seen him do before. And, he's also in connection with basically every living thing at any moment around the planet, which is quite a bit to take on as a single person. But then again, he has been meditating and striving for this for basically 60 years, so he's had time to think about it. The llama then explains to Carter that the life force of the planet has told him that he would be leaving this place and that he should be prepared for a fight on behalf of all living things all over the planet, as we see him start to almost levitate off the ground, and the vines and the different leaves start to envelop him and Carter and the American spirit. As the llama says, "Let's go see our friends," the surrounding servants all bow down as the leaves encase their bodies in what Carter describes in his inner monologue as an unbelievable vibrant green, but then it quickly turns to orange and then red, and then suddenly it's gone. And we then see that the two men are now in Central Park in New York City, and Carter can't believe it. And why should he be? They just teleported from the other side of the globe by way of leaves. And Carter states that he hasn't been to New York since the war ended. And Llama hasn't either, as the two men start to walk through the city, making their way towards the Dynamic Forces video building to make contact with the Dynamic family to get their hands on the urn and free all of the heroes who are trapped inside. As they make their way in, they are given no resistance, as the woman at the front desk tells them to go right up on to the top floor and meet up with the Dynamic family. We then see the men reach the top floor. As they enter the penthouse, they are greeted with open arms by the Dynamic man, whose actual name is Bert, as he embraces the green llama, immediately, stating, Mal, it's so good to see you again. But he, of course, does not recognize Carter due to how much he's aged. And this, once again, shows that the dynamic family has not aged, just like the llama. We see that Bruce is prepared for this as he takes out his mask, puts it on, and says, "Do you recognize me now?" Bert states, "Wow, I can't believe it. We all thought you had died." And then, goes on to continue a conversation with the llama as the llama explains to him that they've come here for the urn. And without going into too much detail of explaining exactly why they're there and exactly what their plan for the urn is, Llama tells Bert that, Carter is dying and that he's trying to basically get all of his ducks in a row at the end of his life, making amends with people like the dynamic family and the llama. And, there's something that he needs to do to basically get closure by seeing the urn one last time. The dynamic man is surprised that the two knew he was the caretaker, as he's also been charged with taking care of a lot of other ancient relics and potential magical items. He then seems to change his tone a little bit and become a little bit less hospitable towards the two men. And this catches Carter and the llama off guard as the dynamic woman starts to poke fun at Carter about his looks. We then see that the llama jumps to his defense, stating, "We've just aged better than he has. There's no need for you to be rude." We then see that the dynamic man picks up the urn and tells Bruce that he can hold it one last time. Bruce, of course, intends to shatter the urn because that is what the American spirit told him he has to do in order to free all of the heroes who are trapped inside of it. However, it has to be Bruce that does this, because if anyone else does, they won't be freed. And at that point, apparently all will be lost. The dynamic man then simply drops the urn and says, "Oops," casually, as we see Carter dive to the floor to catch the urn to make sure that it's not damaged before he can be the one to destroy it. He then looks up at his old friend and states, "Why on earth would you do that?" And then, without hesitation, realizing that something is definitely awry, he smashes the urn on the floor himself as it breaks into pieces and nothing happens, which is not what Carter expected to see. Then we see that the dynamic man states, "Why would you do such a thing?" As Carter looks back at the llama and is still shocked that nothing happened. He's interrupted when the dynamic man says, that he's had all of these items tested for their magical abilities, and he personally oversaw himself the exorcism of the urn, and basically the end of all the heroes who were trapped inside. Carter is shocked to hear this information and says, "How could you do such a thing? Those were our friends. It's inhuman." And then the dynamic woman chimes in and says, "Whoever said we were human?" On the next page, we see an advertisement for the Lone Ranger number 11. Again, like the Zorro comic, I never really read the Lone Ranger comic that was put out by Dynamite. I know it has no tie-in with the movie that Johnny Depp was in, and is probably much closer to the original Lone Ranger stories and serials. Again, if you happen to buy that book and read through it, let me know if it was any good in the comments below. I'd like to know myself. We then see an advertisement for Red Sonja number 32. Red Sonja, also a Dynamite book that I never really got into. The book was well underway by the time I had started getting into any of the stuff that Dynamite was doing. And personally, I didn't feel like trying to go back and hunt down all the earlier issues. If I found a sizable run of it, again, I would probably buy it if it was a decent price. I've always thought that Red Sonja was a pretty cool character, and I would actually enjoy reading through a long format story in comic books. So hopefully one day I'll come across that. Meanwhile, the dynamic family has now played their hand and subdues both of the men as they state it's time for them to leave and that they'll clean up the mess. The llama states that he's sorry for bothering them, as we see the dynamic man usher Carter back towards the elevator and states, your elevators here have, we'll see you later. And then he and the other family members throw the llama and Carter into the elevator shaft, but there's no elevator, and the two men are just free falling. Apparently, the dynamic family had the intention of murdering the two men. However, Llama states to Carter not to worry, that he can still fly, as he grabs his friend by the jacket and makes his way to try and save both of their lives. The llama decides that instead of going down, he will take the two men up towards the top of the building. And unfortunately, Carter sees that there is an elevator careening downward towards them, as apparently the dynamic family wasn't trying to take any chances. However, the green llama is not only able to fly, but also very much in possession of super strength and durability, as he just punches a hole straight through the bottom of the elevator and back out through the top, carrying Carter with him as they are followed by the American Spirit. The men then regroup on the rooftop of the building that they're in, and Llama says that, I guess we know where things stand now. They're then interrupted by the dynamic man, who says, enough of this, Llama. You're an old man, despite the fact that you don't look it, and Bruce is just as old, and no matter what they look like, they're both obsolete, as we see Bruce putting his costume back on. Keep in mind, we found out in issue number 0 that the source of all of Bruce's superpowers is donning the cloak of his ancestor, which bestows upon him just incredible strength and durability, and the ability to perform feats that no mortal human could do. And it's a good thing that he did this, as he is then stomped into the roof by the dynamic woman, as she states, "Why won't you just die, old man?" We then see that the llama decides to not wait for them to make the next move, as he lunges forward, trying to press an attack on the dynamic man. Carter states in his own inner monologue that, despite the fact that that really hurt, he would have been dead if he had not been donning the cloak, and he's grateful that he had the presence of mind to do so. Carter then states that he's been hearing a strange, loud, high-pitched whir, which is apparently some sort of an alarm or signal, as we see hundreds, if not thousands, of other dynamic family members rushing through the front of the building from the streets, as they all try to join in the battle against the llama and Carter. This is definitely unexpected, both on our end as the readers and on the end of Carter and the llama, as they didn't seem to know that there would be, just hundreds and hundreds of other dynamic family members who assumingly all have the same abilities as the three that they're fighting now. As they run across the sidewalk, we then see a hand burst out through the pavement, as we see none other than the Black Terror clawing his way out through the sidewalk. But the Terror himself has no idea that he's been locked away in the urn for 60 plus years at this point. And for him, all he knows is what was happening the moments before he was locked away in the urn, and that he was betrayed by Carter, who was supposedly his best friend. He then shouts out, "Bruce, I'm going to kill you. I don't care why you're doing this. I'm just going to kill you," which is a really cool, plot device of a man who was supposed to be Bruce's best friend at one point now wants nothing more than to, commit an act of vengeful murder against him. Meanwhile, back on the rooftop, we see that Carter and the llama are being swarmed by all of the people who rushed into the Dynamic Forces building, as they try to subdue the two men, grabbing them, trying to attack. Llama seems to be getting overwhelmed, as Carter does his best to fight the attackers off, using every bit of his powers that he has to try and gain any sort of footing. But he realizes that this battle is not going their way, as he cries out to the American Spirit that, please don't let Jet die, at least try to save him, as he believes this is the end of his own life. And then suddenly we see the Black Terror burst onto the rooftop, as he starts to fight his way through the minions, but not because he's trying to help out, but because they're in his way of getting to Bruce, and he will stop at nothing to kill Bruce. He also demands that Bruce tell him what happened to Tim, and that, he'll never forgive him for any of these things. Tim, of course, was the Black Terror's sidekick, and this is where Bruce realizes that the Terror has no idea of the time that's passed since the last time these two men faced off against each other, and that it's going to be really difficult to try and explain to him what's going on when they're dealing with all of this huge mess of a battle around them. Bruce continues to become more disheartened as he not only believes that they are losing the battle, but he's shocked that only one of the heroes that he trapped inside of the urn has reappeared, that hero being the Black Terror, whose real name is Bob. The Black Terror, meanwhile, as he's making his way through the crowd, is shocked when he runs into the Dynamic Man and states, "Hey, did you know what Bruce did to me? And I'm also positive that he did this to some of the others as well." The Dynamic Man, however, is shocked to see the Black Terror and states that this wasn't supposed to happen. He did everything he needed to do to exorcise the magic from the urn, and that the Black Terror shouldn't be here. The Black Terror then responds, wait, the urn had some actual powers, as he starts to realize that things may not be exactly the same way that he remembered them from what he believed was only a few moments ago. The Dynamic Man then grabs the Black Terror's legs, slamming him down into the concrete. The Black Terror starts to get back up and says, no one's going to stop me from getting my revenge on Bruce and to stop hitting him so hard. However, the Dynamic Man responds by once again smacking him down into the concrete, as the Black Terror seems a little bit jarred from this, and the Dynamic Man mocks him and says, yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. We're all friends here. The next page, we have an advertisement for Midtown Comics in New York City. I've never been to Midtown Comics, but I would like to go sometimes because I've never heard a bad thing about Midtown Comics, and it seems like a really cool place to check out if you're ever in New York City, or if you live in New York City. We then see an advertisement for The Boys. I've never actually been able to read any issues of The Boys. I've only seen the first 2 seasons of the show. But if I ever find a full run of The Boys, I would probably buy it just to go through and read it. It seems like a really fantastic story. We then see that the Dynamic Man has decided that he's had enough of the Black Terror, as he once again mocks him, stating, "You really don't know what has happened to you." As the Black Terror realizes that he's under attack, he strikes back, but is shocked when his fist goes straight through the chest of the Dynamic Man, as he apologizes profusely and says, I didn't realize I could punch so hard. It's at this point that Bruce realizes the weird things he was seeing through his goggles, which are supposed to allow him to see spectral energies and demons and evil spirits, weren't registering the right way on the Dynamic family, and it's because they are all robots. We then see that the Black Terror is also shocked by this revelation, finding out that a man that he used to fight alongside and battle the Nazis with is actually a robot now, but is relieved as he believes that, he didn't actually hurt him and that he can be repaired. However, the Dynamic Man looks up and calls him an imbecile as he jumps forward, attacks once again, and punches him, knocking him straight off the side of the building. We then see the Black Terror falling down the side of the building, as we believe he may be falling towards his demise. However, as he careens closer towards the pavement below, we see that he is able to spin himself around and hit a flagpole coming out of the side of the building, slowing himself down a little bit, but not enough that it should have saved him, when we see him land feet first on the pavement, collapsing it down underneath him in a very dynamic superhero type of landing. And as he steadies himself, he becomes even more angry and says, okay, Bruce, fighting Yank gets reprieve. I'm not going to kill you until after I've killed Dynamic Man, as he shakes his fist in anger as we reach the end of the story. Here in the Fighting Yanks War Journal, we find out that Bruce was always a very strong and fearless man, and was always considered to be one of the better fighters in the group of superheroes that were fighting the Nazis back during World War II. However, being trapped in the urn for so long has apparently had the surprising effect of amplifying all of these traits, as Bruce now possesses some not so insignificant feats of super strength and super durability, and now is without fear entirely. Uh, this is something that I wasn't expecting to see, that the urn would somehow increase the abilities of those trapped inside of it, but apparently that's what happened, and I'll be interested in seeing how this may or may not affect other superheroes who may or may not have been freed from the urn. Continuing in the Yanks War Journal, we find out that through the Dynamic Forces Corporation, the Dynamic family has been able to amount unimaginable wealth and power throughout the entire globe, and that no one could have ever guessed that this is where they would have gone after their days of fighting the war. Also, interestingly enough, as you may remember, I referred to the Dynamic Man's name being Bert earlier in the comic, and that's because that's what the Green Llama calls him during their conversation. However, in the War Journal here at the end of the book, Bruce states that his name is Kurt. So, take your pick. I don't know which one is right. It's kind of a big error in editing that they named him two different names in two different parts of the book. You'd have thought someone might have been watching out for that. We then get a 2-page spread of sketches of all of the Golden Age characters. Starting from the top left, we have Hydro, then of course the Fighting Yank, Silver Streak, Captain Future, the Woman in Red, the Target and the Targeteers, Cat, Kitten, the Owl, Strongman, Major Victory, and in their Golden Age forms, the Dynamic Man and Dynamic Boy. Obviously, they don't look quite the same as they did, but it does appear that they haven't aged, at least not Dynamic Man. Dynamic Boy may have. But again, they're also robots, so maybe they're just built to look like that. We then see a page where we're given a step-by-step of how a page is created for the interior of the book. This is due to the fact that the team of Steven Sadowski and Doug Klaba, I'm not sure how to say that, I apologize, who were penciling and inking issue number 0 are not the ones who will be penciling and inking issues 1 through 7. So they wanted to give a little bit of an explanation, but also kind of like, say, hey, don't worry, the book's in good hands. These artists are great as well. And then we see Dynamite Dispatches, which is not totally different from Image Info. It's just kind of a little blurb about upcoming comics and different events and whatnot. It's, information that would have been prudent at the time, but not so much 16 years after the book was printed. We then see an advertisement for Battlestar Galactica Origins, which is a comic book that plays off of the story of the remake of Battlestar Galactica that was on the Sci-Fi Channel in the early 2000s. I didn't really get that into it. I was never a huge Battlestar Galactica fan from the beginning, and I didn't think that the remake on the Sci-Fi Channel was necessarily terrible. It just didn't really grab my interest, and I'd be very unlikely to ever read this comic, seeing as how it's a property that's not something I find all that entertaining to begin with. And we then see an advertisement for Adolescent Radioactive Black Belt Hamsters, which I can only assume is a spoof of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is kind of hilarious when you consider the fact that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was in fact itself a spoof of the comic book industry at large, and we're now seeing a spoof of a spoof. It's spoofception, I guess. We then see an advertisement for the graphic novel collected edition of the Mercenaries comic book adaptation based off of the video game The Mercenaries, or just Mercenaries, I suppose. I've never read this comic. I only played the video game a little bit. It was fine. I didn't think it was amazing or anything, but, if you wanted to have like an open world experience where there was a lot of gunplay and explosions, you weren't going to be disappointed with it. We then see an advertisement for the many graphic novel collections of Red Sonja that were on sale at the time as well. We then get an advertisement for the Darkness Ava crossover comic miniseries that was a crossover event between Dynamite and Top Cow. It seems pretty cool, and if I found these, I would most likely buy them to do some videos on. and then an advertisement for Dynamite.com, where you can get all of the latest information about upcoming Dynamite books and properties. Of course, the ones listed here may or may not still be under the Dynamite banner, but if you go there today, I'm sure you can find out what properties are. And that was Project Superpowers #1. I did like this issue. However, I do feel that at times it was kind of confusing. Keep in mind, issue 0 took place exclusively during like World War II and the early 1950s for the most part, outside of the present day stuff that was going on with the conversation between Bruce Carter and the American Spirit. So when we're now engaged in a story where we're introducing the Dynamic Family and the Green Llama and the Black Terror, all characters that we were introduced to in that issue but didn't really get a chance to know anything about, it seems like there's all sorts of backstory that we should have about these characters and don't. Everything is super mysterious. The feelings that these characters have towards one another, we don't fully comprehend because we don't really understand, what their relationships were throughout either the last 60 years or just the time that they had during World War II. We know very little about these characters' personalities or what their motivations may be. So despite the fact that the whole story revolves specifically around Carter and his quest, we do need to know what's, the ins and outs of the greater universe and the other characters involved to fully grasp what the story is trying to tell. And I feel at this point, we don't know any of that. A lot of it's just guessing games. To me, I feel like they maybe should have done some more flashback stuff and given us a little bit more backstory on the relationships that were taking place between the Dynamic Family and the Llama and the Black Terror and Carter, in the late 40s, the mid 40s, the early 50s, before Carter went around and started, capturing everyone to put them inside of the urn. I feel like that would have, at least given us a little bit more context to the relationship that these characters all have with one another. But then again, those are just my opinions. You might have thought they did a great job with this, or perhaps you also think that maybe they should have given us a little bit more info to go with. But at any rate, it's all good because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.